All right, guys, welcome to section 9.6, which is on the quadratic formula. We've actually been preparing for this all week by looking at solving quadratic equations. Quadratic equations are things that look like this right here, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. One example of a quadratic equation that you guys were just solving was things that look like this, x squared minus 49 is equal to 0. Now, this is a quadratic equation because it has that x squared in it. But you're going to notice it doesn't have the b term. So the thing that just has a plain old x, it doesn't have a plain old x in it. There's just x squared and a c term, the thing without an x. If that's ever the case, these are pretty actually more easy quadratic equations to solve. What you guys can do is just isolate the x squared. So you would add 49 to both sides, giving you x squared is equal to 49. And once you have x squared by itself, you take the square root of both sides. Anytime you take the square root of both sides, that creates a plus or minus. You'll notice that the square and the square root cancel, but then we'd have the square root of 49, which is 7. So your two answers here are 7 and negative 7. We've also solved quadratic equations using factoring, and I think you guys have gotten pretty good at factoring. Factoring, of course, means putting it in sets of parentheses like this. And the way that we would factor this statement is you look at the c term, you say, hey, what multiplies to the c term, which is negative 18 in our problem? That would add to our middle term, and our middle term is the number negative 3. So you'd have to think of the factors of 18 and pick ones that add to negative 3. The factors, of course, would be negative 6 and positive 3. So our factors would be x minus 6 and x plus 3. From here, you would have to think about what makes each set of parentheses 0. That would be 6 here. And what makes this one 0 would be negative 3. So our answers to this problem would be 6 and negative 3. Now, these two different methods that we use to solve quadratic equations are great. However, they are somewhat restrictive. They only work in certain situations. The method over here, solving using square roots, only works when there's no b term. And factoring only works when our answers are relatively nice, like this. In 9.6, we look at solving equations that are potentially more difficult. Actually, the quadratic formula will literally always work. So the quadratic formula can solve any quadratic equation. I have an example of a quadratic equation here. 3x squared plus 5x minus 8 equals 0. And we're going to attempt to solve that using the quadratic formula. I actually consider the quadratic formula kind of like the pinnacle or the highlight of nonlinear algebra. You guys would have noticed I had a poster that was the quadratic formula. Here's the quadratic formula right here. I had a poster like that above my smartboard. It is great. It's something that you're going to be using consistently in Algebra 2. The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so I've got some steps over here. Step 1 says to set one side of the equation equal to 0. And so here's our quadratic equation. One side is already set equal to 0. If this had a number over here, you'd have to move it to this side because in order for the quadratic equation to work, one side has to be 0. Step 2 says to identify the a, the b, and the c term. The a term is 3 because that's what's in front of x squared. The b term is 5 because that's in front of x. And the c term is negative 8 because that's the thing by itself. The rest of step 2 says to enter them into the quadratic formula. So here's the quadratic formula. We have it written. Well, everywhere there's a b is going to need to be the number 5. Everywhere there's a is going to need to be the number 3. And then our lone c will be the number negative 8. And so this equation right here is going to give us our two solutions once we simplify it. And the rest of the steps are going to be helping you guys simplify this correctly. Your next step says to simplify everything underneath the radical first. The radical is that square root sign, so you're going to simplify all the numbers underneath there right now. We know what 5 squared is. We know that 5 squared is 25. And I could type in -4 times 3 times -8, and that's going to give me 96. That's supposed to be a 96. That's really gross. Sorry about that. So we have -5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 96 over 6. We still haven't simplified everything underneath the root yet. 25 plus 96 is 121. So we have -5 plus or minus the square root of 121 over 6. We should know the square root of 121. The square root of 121 is 11. If we didn't, we could have typed that into our calculator as well. When you take the square root of 121, notice you get rid of the root sign because the square root of 121 is 11. So you have -5 plus or minus 11 over 6. Now it says to get rid of the plus or minus by creating two different problems. What I mean by that is we're going to have one problem that says -5 plus 11 over 6, and one problem that says -5 minus 11 over 6. Now -5 plus 11 is 6, so we have 6 over 6, which is number 1. Now our other solution is going to be -5 minus 11, which is -16 over 6. Now -16 over 6 could be simplified to -8/3, or you could type that in your calculator and that would give you your answer as well. So our answers from doing the quadratic formula are 1 and -8/3. What that tells us is that if we took the number 1, we could plug 1 in for x, and we should get 0. We should also be able to plug in the number -8/3 in for x and get 0. So that's an introduction to the quadratic formula. You should be practicing this. I will upload another example of this as well from Khan Academy. Good luck.